she was only 10 years old. 10. And she'd spent 3 days practicing her Korean greeting, carefully drawing a white tiger surrounded by flowers for the grandmother she'd never met. Her name was Zuri, a beautiful black child with an afro puff decorated with a pink bow, glasses framing innocent eyes that still believed the world was fair. She bowed perfectly, spoke the words her Korean Mafia father had taught her, held out her drawing with trembling hands. And her own grandmother, Song Mi-rae, the ruthless matriarch of a criminal empire, looked at this child, at her dark skin, at her hopeful smile, and said in cold English so the girl would understand every word, "She doesn't fit." 2 words that shattered a 10-year-old's heart. 2 words that made a decorated drawing fall from small fingers. 2 words that forced a father to choose between the criminal organization he'd served for 14 years and the daughter he'd only known for 6 months. What Ji-hoon said next would either save his family or sign their death warrants. What his mother demanded in return would test whether love could survive in a world built on blood and betrayal. And what this innocent black child would ultimately teach a woman who'd spent 68 years building walls around her heart, no one saw coming. Before we begin the story, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about karma, love, and hidden truths move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The rain fell in sheets that Sunday evening, drumming against the windows of the private Korean restaurant like 1,000 impatient fingers. Inside, the air was thick with silence, the kind that settles over a room when words have already been weighed and found wanting. Zuri sat perfectly still in her pink dress, the white bow at her collar slightly crooked from the car ride. Her small hands clutched a piece of paper covered in careful crayon strokes. A white tiger surrounded by flowers, each petal colored with the earnest imprecision of a 10-year-old's devotion. She had practiced her Korean greeting for 3 days, had asked her father, Appa she'd begun calling him, though the words still felt new and precious on her tongue, to correct her pronunciation again and again, until he'd laughed and said it was perfect. She didn't know why her mother's jaw had been tight all morning, why Appa had checked his phone 17 times on the drive over, why the restaurant had cleared out completely except for their table. She only knew that she was finally going to meet her grandmother, her Haimoni. The word felt like a gift she'd been waiting her whole life to unwrap. The door opened with a whisper of expensive hinges. Song Mi-rae entered as she always did, without hurry, without fanfare, with the absolute certainty that rooms rearranged themselves around her presence, whether they wished to or not. Her white hanbok was immaculate, her silver hair pulled back so severely it looked painful. She was 68 years old and had not smiled genuinely in 16 years, not since the night her husband's blood had pooled on marble floors she'd walked across every day of their marriage. Zuri stood immediately, just as Appa had taught her. She bowed, deep and respectful, and spoke in careful Korean. "Hello, grandmother. It is a pleasure to meet you." Her voice carried the slight lilt of a child speaking a language that doesn't yet belong to her, that she's borrowing from someone she loves. Mi-rae stopped. For 3 full seconds, she simply looked at the child, at her dark skin, luminous even in the restaurant's muted lighting, at the afro puff decorated with its cheerful pink bow, at the glasses that magnified eyes filled with hope so naked it was almost obscene, at the drawing clutched in small, trembling fingers. She walked to the head of the table, sat down, did not return the greeting. Zuri's smile flickered like a candle in wind. She glanced at her mother, confusion beginning to cloud her features. Amara's hand found Zuri's under the table, squeezed once. A mother's silent promise that she was still there, still protecting, still standing between her daughter and whatever was coming. Ji-hoon's voice cut through the silence, speaking in Korean, the language of his childhood, of duty, of everything he'd been before he knew he had a daughter. Mother, this is Zuri, my daughter, your granddaughter. Mi-rae's response came in the same tongue, measured and cold as winter steel. Blood does not make family. Choices do. Amara answered in Korean so fluent it caused Mi-rae's eyes to narrow with surprise. And your son chose to know his daughter. We chose to come here out of respect. The two women regarded each other across the table. One who had built an empire on the bones of betrayers, one who had built a life on the singular purpose of protecting a child from ever feeling unwanted. They were mothers, both of them, but they had learned motherhood in different languages, under different stars. Zuri, understanding that something was wrong, but not knowing what, held out her drawing with both hands, the gesture so innocent it hurt to witness. "Grandmother, I drew this for you." The white tiger, the flowers, hours of careful work, tongue poking out in concentration, eraser shavings scattered across her bedroom floor. A child's offering to a grandmother she'd never met but already loved, because children love like that, wholesale, unreserved, with no knowledge yet that love can be a weapon used against them. Mi-rae looked at the drawing. Her face remained expressionless, carved from the same unforgiving stone that had seen her through assassinations, territorial wars, betrayals that would have broken softer people. She did not reach for it. When she spoke, she switched to English, and every person at that table knew why. She wanted Zuri to understand, wanted the child to hear it in words she could not misinterpret or soften or hide behind linguistic confusion. She doesn't fit. 2 words, 3 syllables, 10 letters that landed like bullets. Zuri didn't fully comprehend. Not yet. She was only 10, still learning that the world contained cruelties that had nothing to do with whether you'd been good or bad, kind or mean. But she felt it. Felt the rejection, like a door slamming in her face, like winter wind cutting through her pink dress with its carefully pressed collar. The drawing trembled in her hands. Ji-hoon stood so abruptly, his chair scraped against the floor like a scream. His hand found Zuri's, found his daughter's hand, this child he'd only known for 6 months, but would die for without hesitation. This living proof that he'd once done something right in a life built on wrong things. Then I leave this world. His voice didn't shake, didn't rise. It simply stated a fact, the way a man might announce he was stepping outside for air. But everyone in that room knew what this world meant. Not the planet, not society, the organization. The family business built on violence and loyalty and blood oaths that men died keeping. Mi-rae's teacup paused halfway to her lips. "You have responsibilities." "I have a daughter. That's my responsibility now." He guided Zuri toward the door, Amara following, her body positioned between her child and the woman who'd just broken her heart in 2 languages. At the threshold, Amara turned back. Her voice was steady, controlled, but underneath it ran a current of rage so pure it could have cut diamond. "She's 10 years old, and you just shattered her. I hope your purity is worth that." The door closed behind them with a soft, final click. Mi-rae sat alone in the empty restaurant, surrounded by untouched food and the ghost of a child's hope. On the table, abandoned, was a single pink crayon that had rolled from Zuri's pocket. She picked it up with fingers that had once held her husband's hand as he bled out, that had signed execution orders, that had built an empire from the ruins of her grief. The crayon felt impossibly light, impossibly small. She closed her eyes. In the car, Zuri was silent. She stared out the rain-streaked window, the rejected drawing clutched in her lap, now crumpled from small fists that had tried so hard to hold steady. Ji-hoon drove with his jaw clenched so tight Amara could hear his teeth grinding. Nobody spoke. What was there to say? How do you explain to a 10-year-old that her grandmother, her own blood, her halmani, had taken one look at her beautiful brown skin and decided she wasn't good enough? How do you make that make sense when it doesn't? When it never will? When the only honest answer is that some people are broken in places you can't see, and they break others because it's all they know how to do. That night, after Zuri had cried herself into exhausted sleep, after Amara had held her daughter and promised her over and over that she was perfect, that she was loved, that there was nothing wrong with her. Nothing, baby, nothing at all. The adults sat in the living room and whispered their fury at each other like prisoners plotting escape. "I told you," Amara hissed, her voice raw from her own suppressed tears. "I told you we shouldn't expose her to this. She deserved to meet her grandmother. That woman is nobody's grandmother. She looked at our daughter like she was nothing, like she was dirt on expensive shoes." Ji-hoon's hands shook as he poured himself whiskey he wouldn't drink. "She just needs time." "Zuri doesn't have time. She's 10 years old, Ji-hoon. 10! She doesn't have years to wait for a racist old woman to decide if she's human enough." The word hung between them. Racist. They'd danced around it before, softened it, called it traditional and old-fashioned and from a different generation. But strip away the euphemisms and that's what it was. Pure, simple, racist. "I'll fix this," Ji-hoon said, and he sounded so lost, so much like a man who'd just realized the empire he'd served was built on sand. "How? You can't change who your mother is." "I can leave the organization. We can go somewhere else. Start over." Amara laughed, but there was no humor in it, only the bitter sound of a woman who'd heard promises before. "You said leaving means becoming a target. Then I'll negotiate. Find a way." In her bedroom, Zuri lay awake, listening to every word through walls that suddenly felt paper thin. She understood more than they knew, understood that her existence was a problem, that her skin was wrong, that her father might have to leave his entire life behind because his mother couldn't love her. She picked up her sketchbook, found the drawing she'd been working on for weeks, all 4 of them together, a family, smiling, and tore it out. Slowly, carefully, until the happy family was just scraps of paper scattered across her unicorn bedspread. 3 days passed. 3 days in which Zuri barely spoke at school, barely ate at home, barely did anything except exist in the quiet way children do when they're trying to make themselves smaller, less of a burden, less of a problem. Her teacher called Amara, concerned. "She asked me today why some people don't like other people just because of their color." The teacher's voice was gentle, but underneath it was the exhaustion of someone who'd had this conversation too many times with too many children who shouldn't have to ask that question at all. In the car ride home, Amara pulled over, turned around in her seat. "Baby, look at me." Zuri looked up, and her eyes were red-rimmed, tired in a way no 10-year-old should ever be tired. "There is nothing wrong with you. Nothing. You are beautiful and smart and kind. If someone can't see that, the problem is theirs, Not yours. Never yours. But she didn't even take my drawing. I know, baby. I know it hurt. Is Appa going to leave now? Because of her? The question landed like a physical blow. No, your father loves you. He's not going anywhere. Promise? Amara promised, even though she wasn't sure it was a promise she could keep. Even though Ji-hoon was at that very moment kneeling before a council of men who'd decided his daughter's existence was a problem that needed solving. The office smelled of expensive tobacco and older violence, the kind that had seeped into the walls over decades, until the building itself remembered every betrayal, every execution, every oath sworn and broken. Ji-hoon knelt on the floor before 5 men who'd watched him grow from a boy into a killer, who'd taught him that loyalty was measured in blood and silence. Song Mi-rae sat at the center, a queen on a throne built from the bones of everyone who'd ever underestimated her. You've disgraced this family, Counselor Park said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd never had to question his own belonging. Brought an outsider into our lives, and now you want to abandon your oaths? Ji-hoon kept his head bowed, but his voice was steel wrapped in silk. I've given 14 years of loyalty, bled for this organization. I'm only asking to leave in peace. Mi-rae's laugh was soft, almost gentle, which made it more terrifying than any scream. Peace is earned, not granted. She slid a folder across the polished table. It landed at Ji-hoon's knees with a soft thud that might as well have been a gunshot. He opened it with hands that had killed 7 men but now trembled like a child's. Inside, photographs of Amara leaving her apartment, timestamps of Zuri's school pickup, the address of Amara's parents in Lagos, a dossier on Zuri's uncle studying medicine in London, names, faces, schedules. Every person his daughter loved, catalogued like inventory. The message was clear. You want to leave? Fine. But everyone you love becomes a loose end. You want peace? Mi-rae's voice was conversational, almost kind. Prove our world is safe. Prove she'll never be a problem. How? The word came out strangled. Bring her here. Let her see who you really are, what we really do. If she stays after that, if she can look at your hands and know what they've done and still hold them, then perhaps I'll reconsider. Ji-hoon's head snapped up. And if she runs? Mi-rae smiled, and it was the saddest thing in that room full of sad things. Then she proves my point, and we let her run. Under permanent observation, of course. A small price for your betrayal. That night, Ji-hoon returned to the apartment to find Amara's suitcases half-packed. Not gone, just half-packed, like she'd spent 11 hours trying to decide whether to protect her daughter by leaving or protect her daughter by staying, and couldn't figure out which protection would actually protect anything at all. There's a way, he said, but you'll hate me for it. He explained the test. The warehouse at 11 p.m. The real operation, money transfers, weapons, the shadow side that he'd hidden behind lies about import-export businesses and late-night meetings. If Amara could see it, witness it, and not run screaming, then Mi-rae would consider acceptance, would consider letting them exist. And if I run? Amara's voice was hollow. You stay alive, but never free. And I'm never free of losing you. Why should I do this? You lied to me. Your family is racist. Your world is violence. Because despite all of that, you're still here. Your bags have been half-packed for 11 hours. You're furious with me. You should have left, but you didn't. Tears carved tracks down Amara's face, and she hated them. Hated that after everything, she still cried over a man who'd built their entire relationship on deception. "I hate you for making me love you." I know. The next evening, at 11 p.m. precisely, Amara arrived at the warehouse with Ji-hoon. She'd told Zuri she had a late work meeting, had kissed her daughter's forehead, and pretended her hands weren't shaking. The building loomed like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole, all concrete and shadows, and men with guns who looked at her the way Mi-rae had looked at Zuri, like she was a problem that hadn't been solved yet. Ji-hoon guided her through corridors where every footstep echoed like a countdown. Guards at every corner. Not one of them smiled. Not one of them acknowledged her as anything more than a test subject, a variable in an equation that would determine whether she lived freely or spent the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. They entered an elevated office with windows overlooking the warehouse floor. Mi-rae stood there. The council stood there. And in the center of the room sat a single chair, empty, waiting. Waiting for Amara to sit in judgment of herself. "Sit." Amara sat. Through the glass, she watched. Men moving crates stamped with symbols she recognized from news reports about smuggling. Money being counted in stacks that could feed families for years. Weapons being inspected with the casual efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. This was Ji-hoon's world. This was what he'd hidden behind kisses and promises and bedtime stories for Zuri. This was the truth. "My son says you're strong," Mi-rae said, and her voice carried something that might have been curiosity, or might have been the prelude to a death sentence. "That you understand our world." Amara's voice didn't shake. She'd learned, raising a black daughter alone in a world that wanted to break her child before she even understood what breaking meant, that sometimes you survive by refusing to show fear, even when fear is the only rational response. "I don't understand, and I'll never approve." Counselor Kim leaned forward. "Then why are you here?" "Because I love someone who's more than his choices. Because you forced him to be this since he was a child. And because—" She turned to look directly at Mi-rae, this woman who held their lives in hands that had ordered deaths before breakfast. "You're testing the wrong person." The room went still. Even the guards by the door seemed to stop breathing. "You're not afraid of me," Amara continued, and she felt something break open inside her, some dam that had been holding back months of rage and fear and exhaustion. "You're afraid your son will choose happiness over obligation. That he'll be free in a way you never were. That he'll break cycles you spent your entire life building." Silence. Absolute. Suffocating. "And yes, I'm black. I'm African. I'm not Korean. None of that changes that your son chose me. That he's willing to die for it." Amara's voice cracked, but held. "The real question is, are you willing to lose him, to maintain a purity that hasn't made him happy in 36 years? Mi-rae stood slowly, walked to the window overlooking the empire she'd built from grief and violence and a determination to never be vulnerable again. The fluorescent lights cast her shadow long across the floor, and for a moment she looked impossibly old, impossibly tired. Like a woman who'd been holding up the world for so long she'd forgotten why she'd picked it up in the first place. "My husband was killed by betrayal," she said, her voice so quiet Amara had distrained to hear it. "By someone I trusted. Someone I brought into the family. And I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm not your past pain. Mi-rae's shoulders rose and fell with a breath that seemed to carry decades. Ji-hoon, leave us. Ji-hoon hesitated, his body tensing like he might refuse, like he might throw himself between these two women and whatever was about to happen. But Amara nodded. It was her test, her choice. And she'd never been a woman who needed protection from the truth. The door closed. Just the two of them now. Matriarch and outsider. Korean and African. Past and future. Do you know what he's done? Mi-rae asked, still facing the window. How many lives he's taken to be here? Not completely. And I won't pretend I approve. But I know he wants out. And you're the only person who can let him go without making him a corpse. Mi-rae turned, finally, and her eyes were wet. Not crying. Not yet. But wet with tears that hadn't been permitted to fall in 16 years. If I allow this, if I let my only living son walk away with you, can you promise to keep him from this world forever? I promise. Not because you ordered it, because it's what he actually wants. Mi-rae crossed the room, stood face to face with this woman who'd had the audacity to love her son, to bear his child, to stand in this office full of killers and refuse to flinch. You're brave. Stupid, but brave. She paused, and something shifted in her expression. Something human bleeding through the armor. My blessing doesn't come free. Ji-hoon leaves, but he leaves everything behind. Money, name, protection. You become responsible for him now. I accept. And one last thing. Mi-rae walked to her desk, opened a drawer. Amara's muscles coiled, ready to run, ready to fight, ready to do whatever survival demanded. But what Mi-rae withdrew wasn't a weapon. It was a photograph, old and faded, the colors bleeding into that particular vintage hue that marked it as decades past. A young Korean man with his arm around a young black woman, both smiling like the world had just handed them everything they'd ever wanted. The woman was pregnant, her hand resting on the swell of her belly. My older brother, Mi-rae said, and her voice broke on the word brother like it was a bone snapping. He fell in love with a black woman in 1979. My father disowned him, cast him out. We never saw him again. She traced the edge of the photograph with one finger, a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible from hands that had orchestrated so much violence. I learned years later he'd been happy, had 3 children, died of old age in Seattle, and I never had the courage to find him. Tears fell now, silent and unstoppable, cutting tracks through makeup that had been applied with the precision of armor. I won't repeat my father's mistakes, but understand, protecting bloodlines is all I know. You're asking me to unlearn 68 years. Amara's own throat was tight, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not asking you to forget, just to trust that love protects bloodlines too, just differently. Mi-rae wiped her face with the back of her hand, a gesture so human and raw it was almost painful to witness. She straightened, recovered her composure like pulling on a coat. You have 6 months. If in 6 months you're still together, I'll come to the wedding. 8 months later, a small house with a garden bloomed in a quiet suburb, far enough from the city that the past felt like a story someone else had lived. Zuri planted flowers with her father, dirt under her fingernails, laughter in her throat, finally allowed to be just a child again. Amara watched from the porch with coffee growing cold in her hands, and thought about all the ways love could break you and remake you into something stronger than you'd been before. A car pulled up. Black. expensive. Foreign to this neighborhood of minivans and bicycles left carelessly in driveways. Mi-rae emerged wearing a hanbok in soft blue, not the austere white of mourning and control, but blue like sky, like hope, like beginning again. "How many?" Zuri ran, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice, no fear of rejection. Because in 8 months, Mi-rae had called every Sunday, had sent birthday gifts, had slowly, painfully learned to be a grandmother instead of an empress. The embrace was brief, still slightly awkward, but real. Mi-rae held out a box wrapped in traditional cloth. Inside, professional artist pencils, 120 colors, and a leather journal engraved with words that made Zuri's eyes shine. For Zuri, artist, granddaughter, hope, halmyoni. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Zuri breathed, "for the most beautiful drawings." Later, during cake that Zuri had helped bake, during laughter that came easier now, during moments that felt almost normal, Zuri presented Mi-rae with a gift of her own. A drawing, professionally framed this time, of 4 figures holding hands. Mother, father, daughter, grandmother. All of them smiling. All of them whole. Mi-rae held it with hands that trembled just slightly, held it like it was more precious than any empire, any oath, any legacy built on blood and fear. She looked at Amara, at Ji-hoon, at this family that shouldn't exist according to every rule she'd lived by. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be here." Amara's smile was complicated, carrying all the pain that had come before, but also the possibility of what could come after. "Thank you for choosing her." "No." Mi-rae looked at Zuri, who was now showing her uncle, Amara's brother visiting from London, how to fold paper cranes. "She chose me, even when I didn't deserve it." She whispered then, so quietly only Amara heard, words that felt like confession, like prayer, like the last wall finally crumbling. "My brother was right. Love is worth more than empires." Outside, the sun set over the garden Zuri and Ji-hoon had planted together. White tiger lilies bloomed alongside African daisies, roots intertwined beneath soil that didn't care about borders or bloodlines or all the ways people tried to separate what grew naturally together. And in that moment, in that small house far from the world of violence and control, a family that shouldn't have existed proved that sometimes the most radical act of all is simply choosing love when hate would be easier. Choosing change when staying the same would be safer. Choosing to let a 10-year-old girl with a drawing and a dream teach you that the heart you thought had turned to stone can still, against all odds, remember how to break. And in breaking, finally learn how to heal. If this story moved you, pause for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been judged not for who you are, but for what you look like? Have you watched someone you love forced to choose between family loyalty and protecting the innocent? Have you ever witnessed a child's unconditional love break through walls that violence and time couldn't crack? Share your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about redemption, breaking cycles of hate, and the courage to choose love over legacy, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.